in some scenes he was flying. It was that was a bit wrong for me.
And also there were some of the victims who recovered quite quickly from massive chainsaw injuries.
Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Phil Marriott. Thank you very much for joining us on this channel. If you're not a subscriber, get subscribing. If you're into music and movies, we've got everything for you. Now today, Texas Chainsaw Massacre has already hit Netflix just in the last few days. It's causing lots of problems with people that love the original, myself included. Not that I've got a problem with it as such. We will reveal more obviously during this review, but the original came out in 1974. Joining me to chat about the new version. What are we calling this, Paul?
They recently brought out Scream, didn't they? And it was just called Scream. I guess you just have to. It's a bit like didn't Kylie have like 3 albums called Kylie Minogue? I think you just.
I love how you reference Kylie in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre review.
Yeah, probably the first time that's ever been done. Yeah, I think we'll just say Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022.
Should we talk about the original first? I mean, You've seen the original, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Now, I saw it really young. I was really young because I got into horror movies. I'm sure you're the same, very, very young age. And I remember seeing Halloween when I was, 9 or something, and it gave me nightmares for weeks. I loved it, absolutely. It's my favourite film now. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think I saw a little bit later. I think I was like 12. You're probably thinking your parents are terrible making you watch these or letting you watch these films. And I remember just being shaken to the core. There's not a lot of gore in it, which is surprising because I think a lot of people think that there's a lot of gore in the original version, but there isn't really.
Did you have older siblings?
Yes.
Because I think quite often, like, kids with older siblings got to watch horror young because that's.
That's a good point. Yeah, because my brother was into horror, still is. Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, my sister's only like a year older than me, so I didn't. Anyway, the original is it's very atmospheric and it's kind of very. I mean, it is that 70s thing, isn't it? It's kind of quite grainy, and I think it gets that nastiness of that the place and
it's proper grindhouse, isn't it? I mean, it's proper scuzzy. Like it just makes you feel dirty. You want a cold shower afterwards. So the story of the original, and everybody's on Twitter like complaining about this new film, but then there's people reminding them that there isn't much of a plot in the original film. I don't want to say that there's anything bad about the original because I think the original is so well crafted and it is so disturbing considering there isn't a lot of gore because it's all down to atmosphere, isn't it? And how disturbing this villain is. And the villain is Leatherface, obviously this guy who wears skin over his face as a mask. But yeah, we had a lot of friends in the original visiting Texas to visit the grave of their grandfather or one of the girls' grandfathers, and they stumble across what appears to be a deserted house. They come across somebody with a chainsaw, and then he just like creates havoc. So that was directed by Tobe Hooper, who went on to do Poltergeist. A lot of people think that it was Steven Spielberg. He produced that film, but people think he directed it for some reason. Did you see the Evil Dead remake? I hated it.
I don't know if I did.
I didn't like that remake at all, and this has elements of that. It had the same production values. I
mean, the original, it's weird because you watch it and obviously you remember this. It's kind of almost famous for this pretty protracted chasing with a chainsaw scene. But there is a whole lot of other stuff that happens, and actually there's more than just that villain. There's kind of a whole family of them. Yeah,
because that table scene, I mean, in the original version, that's one of the most disturbing things about that film, I think. Not necessarily just the chainsaw element. It's that, and it's the kind of slow burning torture, isn't it? Which is horrible.
Yeah, and it is. And of course, you know, if you're looking at this film now, which is they call it a sequel, requel. The original, in its simplicity, you know, it is a group of people on a trip who come across something horrific and are trapped. And it's kind of quite plausible. They're on a road trip. I think there's a kind of like almost post-Vietnam thing going on. When you have to then come up with a reason to put characters in a certain place and have the plot moved on, it is going to be perhaps more challenging, but I think they do it really badly.
We're 50 years on, obviously, from the original, and nearly 50 years on because it was 74, wasn't it? We got influencers. They travel to the remote Texas town of Harlow, and this is the funny thing. I mean, I didn't believe it for a second once they explain what was going on. But these youngsters, they want to kind of inject new blood into this town. They want to, well, because they're entrepreneurs really, aren't they? They want to build, you know, their restaurant business and make it profitable in that really quiet area that nobody's visited at all. It's just run down, isn't it?
Even more than that, they kind of want to create a sort of utopian community that's kind of all full of entrepreneurs and is different, and there's references to a character that's been involved in a high school shooting, so almost like an anti-gun thing, and it's kind of it's like a sort of like modern influencer hipster paradise in this what looks like a sort of like empty Wild West ghost town, really.
Let's talk about the Easter eggs, because there are quite a few Easter eggs for fans of the original, which I suppose similar to Halloween when that came back a few years ago with David Gordon Green producing or directing the new Halloween movie, so obviously as part of the trilogy, and we had Halloween Kills more recently. But there is a narrator in a TV documentary that one of our first characters that we see in the shop, in the, I think it's gas station, is it? Petrol station.
Yep.
That we see her in. The guy in the shop references the only survivor from the original, which was Sally Hardesty, who does come back into this film. Again, we'll talk about her in a second. Is it John Larroquette who narrates in the original and the remake in 2003? He's narrating in this. So, you know, there are elements that make you feel like these are people that know, you know, and respect the original.
This is doing kind of exactly what the Halloween film before the last one did, where it's like a sequel a long time on, disregarding anything that may have come out in between. It follows the same timeline, but without anything else having happened.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Because this film is really short. It's like an hour and 15. I looked at it again today because I didn't realise it was a bit after the credits. So I went back and looked at that bit at the end of the credits thinking it was going to be quite exciting. But yeah, it's an hour and 15, which is really short for a movie.
Was it that short?
Yeah.
I didn't note that, which probably in itself isn't a good thing.
It's an hour and 15 when the credits start rolling. And I couldn't believe how short that film was, because obviously they're packing so much into it.
And we had a little Facebook message about my response to it. You've seen it before me, but we didn't really share many ideas because we wanted to save it for this. But one of the things that I found challenging with it is there was a way too much focus on the characters coming into that world, so the influences, and setting up their storyline and who they are, and this whole very, very, I think, contrived thing about taking over this town to be a kind of hipster commune, and very little about the town itself. You know, you've got this ghost town, you've got a couple of sort of a sheriff and a deputy who kind of refer to a couple of things, and you've got a local handyman who's quite hot.
Yeah.
But there's no sense of a legacy of what's happened to this place and what's gone on and kind of how things have impacted them. So interestingly, that the running time is quite short. I wonder whether some of that, there would have been space for more of that might have made it a bit more interesting. Because it just seems like, as I said, way too much focus on the incoming characters.
Yeah, it's almost like it's similar to Halloween Kills in the respect that they just want to kill. kill, like in that very short running time. But also, maybe we're going to get more of that, what you mentioned, you know, maybe more emphasis on the place in the next film, should there be one. I don't know. I'm guessing that it's going to run and run, just like Halloween, the franchise.
I also think there is one particular scene that happens towards the finale that I think is almost like the screenwriters of this, it's almost like they've seen that as their money shot, and then they've hung everything else on it to the detriment of the film. If any horror fans have seen Hellraiser 3, part of that plot is surrounded with this kind of like sort of yuppies as they would have been in the 80s, and this kind of like rich guy who gets hold of the Hellraiser, whatever it is. But there's a really memorable scene in that where there's a whole nightclub full of like young, trendy, yuppie type people dancing, and the doors suddenly get chained, locked, and there's a bloodbath that is probably very satisfying when you're seeing the kind of archetypes that those characters are. And I feel like that has inspired a particular scene in this. It's almost like, how do we get all these annoying influences in a place and then something massive scale, brutal happen to them?
I want to talk about obviously the beginning of the story and how it progresses, and we see the influencers obviously in this town, and they come across this old orphanage. You see a Confederate flag flying above from one of the windows, and obviously that's one of the warning signs. And a lot of people were on Twitter, they were saying, you know, I've got a lot of problems with this film, but one of the problems is that it paints Texans in a really bad light. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I mean, the original didn't either. Do you know what I mean? I suppose there are good Texans, there are bad Texans. I don't think you can say that all Texans are like Leatherface.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, Texas Chainsaw Massacre in itself is like, that's almost like, that title is like what something would be referred to in the news, wouldn't it?
Okay, some of the things I liked, because I sent you a message saying I liked it, because I did like it. I'm not going to spoil things too much, but one of those was Elsie Fisher, who was amazing in 8th grade. Have you seen that film a few years back? Coming of age drama. No. So good, Paul. It's really good. I mean, obviously not a horror, but she's really good in that. Mo Dunford, you mentioned the hot mechanic.
I'm not particularly aware of him until this, but
yeah, apparently he was in Game of Thrones. I'm not a fan of Game of Thrones, but
I don't know.
He's been in that and lots of other TV stuff. He's Irish. He was in Rosie, actually, a film that we reviewed. Link up there somewhere.
I think both him and the actor who plays the older Sally are both Irish, and I think they had worked on a film called Dig with the two people who were the directors that then kind of left the project. So I think that's kind of why there's this little Irish element in it.
We had Sarah Yarkin, who was in a film called Tank House. She played Melody. She reminded me very much of, is it Alana Glazer that was in Broad City?
Yes, I was the same. Yeah. Well. I mean, you mentioned the other lead, and for me, that one looked exactly like the brown-haired girl from Tattoo. All the things she said. So it was like
the lesbians from Russia,
like half of Tattoo and Alana from Broad City, kind of like walking through this ghost town. It was quite odd.
Another thing that I liked was the cinematography. It was by Ricardo Diaz, who was born in Texas, actually. So, that was quite a nice connection. He's done work for Stranger Things. I think he worked on one of the series of Stranger Things a few years back. And it had that feel about it, I think. I think it did look polished. It looked, maybe not grimy enough. There was too much rain as well. That's another thing. I wanted it to be hot and dusty like the original.
There's also always something really disturbing about a horror film where the setting is actually pleasant.
Like the opposite of what you expect.
Yeah. I say it every review, Midsommar. I bring that one up, but that's a film where it's like almost like 24-hour daylight, and it's a beautiful.
Somebody's paying you to reference Midsommar in every review.
The original of that is very, and it's also that whole thing, isn't it? Like sort of like hot roads with like rotting roadkill on them and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so it just seems unnecessary to chuck in a big long rain scene, really.
We mentioned Sally Hardesty, who does return. That's another problem with this film that I have, is that her character was wasted. It's like when she came back, I was like, I was almost like air punching, because this is going to be really exciting.
Wasted as in not used properly. She's not been taking psychedelic drugs for the past 50 years.
If only, that would have made it much more interesting. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, that bus scene. This bus scene with all the influencers, all these kids who are obsessed with their mobile phones. I know that happens. Everybody, millennials seemingly are very obsessed with their mobile phones. But I that spoilt it for me, because up until that point, it was quite tense. The kills I thought were well executed. I thought they were violent. I thought they were really gory. I was quite shocked, and I'm a hardened horror fan. I was like, wow, this is going out on Netflix.
They were really gory, in that whole kind of like skull crushing kind of way. It wasn't. We're not just talking stabbing and severing here. We're talking denting, eviscerating, mashing.
They were quite gruesome, as you would expect, I think, with something that's titled Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But that moment, the bus scene, and we can't talk about it too much, obviously, but everybody is talking about it on Twitter. That spoilt it for me, because it went really full-on comedy, almost to the point of not parody even, because it wasn't even that clever. It was just it just spoiled all what we'd had up until that point, because from then on I just thought, okay, are we going to have more of this, because it's going to completely spoil it for me. I wanted it to be like the mood of the first part. Yeah,
definitely. And it then just makes the plight of the main characters a bit secondary, really.
A lot of people had problems with the comedy elements of Halloween 2018. because there was some comedy in the script. Obviously, with the script writers, they had a comedy background, and some people have a real issue with that because they want comedy to be separate from horror. I know we've seen it done well in films like Shaun of the Dead and other films that balance that comedy and horror quite well, but I think, you know, if it's billed as comedy horror, you know what to expect. If it's horror, I think it can throw it off a little bit, or a lot in this case.
It can really mess with the tone, really. When people then try and overdo the sort of satire or something, which I think this is trying to do, it's kind of not really the right vehicle for that. And it's also that age-old horror thing of, if you have a bunch of unlikable characters, how much do we care about what happens to them? Now, having said that, you know, give me an 80s Slaughter High prom night group of idiots being chased around, you know, all that sort of stuff. But at least there's something a bit kitsch about that and a bit cheesy, whereas this is, just doesn't really have it. And again, I think for me, just the whole setting to make that scene happen and to get the people there is just really, really, really contrived.
See, I really liked them. I liked the characters.
It's a credit to them that, you know, whenever you do something that involves a group of young people traveling to somewhere and then being set upon by menace, you know, it's very easy to be the jock, the nerd, the geek, the stoner, the goth, those sort of archetypes. And you know, they're a lot more interesting than that. Their dynamic is a lot more interesting, and their reason for being there is something different. So, you know, credit to that. But I just think that overall, the way that leads to the plot, the frame of the plot, I think is just too implausible.
So Marilyn Burns, who plays Sally Hardesty originally, the only survivor of 74, she died a few years ago, 2014. So the actress who plays her now is Olwen. You mentioned she's Irish actress Olwen Fuwere. Not sure how you pronounce her name, but
I'm not going to try and pronounce Gaelic names. You go for it. And the return of that character, I think, is really wasted in terms of what they do and what happens to them. And I also just think, why is that not Adrienne Barbeau? Why is that not? I mean, obviously it can't be Jamie Lee Curtis, but like there's quite a few sort of like scream queens at different levels, or people that have that kind of like, you know, a bit like when Sigourney Weaver turns up at the end of The Cabin in the Woods, that sort of stuff. I'm sure there's, you know, no disrespect to that actor, she does a decent job, but I kind of think if you're going to make anything in that role, bring and give it a bit of gravitas, you know, get someone who's more horror related from back in the day.
Alice Krieger, South African actress who, I mean, she was in Chariots of Fire, I think, back in the 80s, and
she is
other horror films.
She is like she is always playing like kind of weird, hysterical, odd. I think she's like the Borg Queen in one of the
Star Trek
Next Generation films. I think there's also in one of those Stephen King adaptations. What's the one where they're sort of like cat people and it's like a mother and a son, and is it Sleepwalkers or something like that?
Yeah,
she's in various of these things, and she's good value.
Because I mean, she plays quite a prominent character at the beginning because she's in the old orphanage, and obviously the influences go in and meet her. Yeah, I mean, there are warning signs straight away because we see an elderly, shadowy figure at the top of the stairs. Now, I asked people on Twitter if they got any comments if they had seen it already. I mean, I saw it pretty much as soon as it hit Netflix. Sarah, hi Sarah. Sarah runs a brilliant review channel called Popcorn Chat. And she sent us a tweet saying, in the era of, did you say era or era? It sounds weird.
I'd say era. Era sounds a bit American, but I also think the moment you think about how you pronounce a word, it makes it really hard. Yeah, on the radio show, I always sometimes say words. I'm like the other day I was doing a shout out to someone called Jared, and I called him Gerard, and I was like, well, why did I call you Gerard?
Gerard Butler.
Really yeah, exactly. Anyway.
So she says, in the era of requels, I'm not sure this one hits the mark. Great kills, yet gradually became more comical. The problem that I've got with it. You can still enjoy the film for what it is. And yeah, I think Sarah hits the nail on the head, because I enjoyed it. I thought it was well done. I liked the look of it. I thought the pace was great. It didn't waste any time. And in some ways, I wish that they'd made it a bit longer to explore the plot a bit more and the characters.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also maybe foreshadowed about what was going on a bit, and maybe had a bit of time even in this place before they arrived, because, you know, it's almost like the menace that turns out to be maybe someone with a chainsaw. It's almost like they're just lurking there and have been lurking there for God knows how many years, just waiting for someone to turn up and then to do what they do. I can't imagine the backstory of the antagonists in this in terms of what's been happening in the past X amount of years.
And everybody was banging on about the shock ending. I saw it coming. It wasn't a surprise or a shock for me at all. For a horror film, were you scared? Were you shocked? Disturbed?
What, by that scene or in general?
By the whole film, the whole experience.
I wasn't particularly scared. I was probably a little bit grossed out, and I probably winced a bit. But I didn't find myself engaging with it massively.
See, one of the other problems with horrors is, for me, if you see too much of the villain. I know what he looks like. Everybody knows what Leatherface looks like now. But I thought, near the beginning, I thought some of the things that he did were quite scary. And there is a connection with Halloween as well, actually, in terms of feel, because I think, we've got this director, which is David Blue Garcia, and Halloween director is David Gordon Green, double-barreled. I mean, yeah, it's a very loose connection.
Double-barreled names with colours in them.
Yeah. But I think the way he held up the skin, there was a moment where he held up the skin about to put it over his face. I thought that was very similar to how Michael Myers held up the mask.
That's almost like what the fans deserve, really. And I think that sort of stuff is fine. It's almost like we're now saying that after all of this, that character is now back. Watch out. We're now going to see how it all unfolds.
And another problem that there were loads of things I liked, but he almost became like a superhero in some respects. In some scenes he was flying. It was that was a bit wrong for me.
And also there were some of the victims who recovered quite quickly from massive chainsaw injuries, including one character who's kind of like held aloft and on a chainsaw, and then makes a bit. I'm not going to say this character's long for this world after that point, but I wouldn't have thought they lasted as long as they did.
Yeah. And one character, I'm not going to spoil it by saying who it was, but wow, that injury, still walking. They're still walking, I should say. You know what I'm talking about.
Is this a facial injury we're talking about? Oh, that's grim. Yeah.
I did actually clutch my face when that happened.
That is really well done, actually. My star rating is 1.
Oh, wow. Don't be too generous now.
And I would say I have been involved in a little bit of film stuff before, and I actually had a producing role on an independent feature that was made in Brixton a few years ago called Honey Trap. And I
need to see that.
I know, and from like when I studied producing and stuff, that like getting a film made is really difficult, and therefore it's very easy to slag films off and etc. etc. However, I think when it's a big budget production with such great source material, I will therefore be harsher on it than an aspirational low-budget British feature that doesn't quite hit the mark. So I kind of think my lower rating is because I think it's a real squandered opportunity.
There was so much that I liked about it. There's so much wrong with it equally. I mean, I'm going to go for 3 stars. I mean, overall, I think if they hadn't had that massive mood switch with the bus scene, which bizarrely, I mean, ironically, I suppose in some respects, is getting all the attention, because that's what people are picking out, is that bus scene, which for me is the worst scene of the whole film. And also, it made me want to see the original again, which I think is a good thing, because people will see the original if they haven't. I'm guessing a lot of young people watching the Netflix movie will delve back in to check out Tobe Hooper's original, which is good.
Yeah. I think I've seen Leatherface, the prequel. I think that's probably available on Netflix or something similar, and that seemed okay. There's also another sequel with Matthew McConaughey and Renée Zellweger in it. I think that's early in their careers. I think if you were to find it now, they're like top billing, but I think that's only because they're
because I actually thought the 2003 remake was actually okay. Probably better than this one, actually.
This one's just got too many ideas thrown at it, and it kind of just doesn't have the focus. So I know we shouldn't really do this because we never talk about half stars, but if it was out of 10, would you be 6 or would you allow yourself to be a 5?
Oh, that's a very pressing question, Paul Joseph.
Because to be fair, I would probably, if I was out of 10, I'd probably give it a 3 rather than a 2.
Yeah.
So
probably.
Creeping towards a 2 for the entertainment factor.
Well, I was quite enthusiastic when I messaged you saying, I think because I was quite surprised that it wasn't as awful as I was expecting, because I went into it thinking it was going to be just terrible, and I don't think it was terrible. I think it did an okay job, but it could have been better. Probably 5. I don't know. I can't decide. Maybe 6, because five is so average smaverage, isn't it? It's probably better than average smaverage.
I try and take into account kind of like potential and resource and all that sort of stuff, and it's almost like could have done better. And you know, for me, often it does come down to story. And I think if that's not right, whatever you then do with really good actors and really good cinematography and all that sort of stuff, you're fighting a losing battle to make it engaging.
Let us know if you've seen it. If you've checked it out on Netflix, maybe our review will push you to investigate.
Yeah, watch it. Why not?
And don't forget to check out our recent review that we did for the film called Shepherd, if you're into horrors. That's a new film that is available digitally and on Blu-ray. And thank you all for watching. Thank you, Paul, as well. See you for the next one. I'm just hoping maybe Halloween Ends we can get our teeth into.
Ooh, yeah.
Later in the year.